Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're joined with John Betts, who is the director and producer of the upcoming documentary on PBS Seed, The Untold Story. We're going to be discovering what's going on in the world of seeds and how our biodiversity is beginning to diminish as we begin to rely too much on single seeds rather than the diversity that the planet gives to us. I'd like to welcome John Betts to our program to talk about this marvelous documentary coming up. John, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you, Daniel. It's great to be here.
Now, how did you move this direction with your life?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I by trade am a documentary filmmaker, and almost a decade ago, I met Taggart Siegel, who's my co-director on this film, and we met working on a film called Queen of the Sun: What Are the Bees Telling Us, that came out around 2010, and that film looked at the global colony collapse disorder of honeybees. And so we're no strangers to stories about loss and disappearance when it comes to the natural world. And we really dove in headfirst into that film and uncovered kind of a whole world of beekeeping that we didn't realize existed, and learning that, we truck commercial beehives are trucked in the thousands of hives across the country on semi-trucks to pollinate our crops. And so the connection to farming became a big part of the story of my work in film. And so it was a natural next step to uncover this story about the loss of seed diversity. And previous to Queen of the Sun, Taggart had made a film called The Real Dirt on Farmer John, which was about one of the first organic community-supported agriculture farms, where the community sort of co-owns the farm by buying shares of that year's produce. And it was one of the first farms that in that style in the Midwest. And Taggart made a film on that. Then he went on to make Queen of the Sun, and we joined forces. And then here we are with Seed.
Had the opportunity and seen both of those documentaries that you mentioned. They're pretty fascinating and eye-opening stuff. And, when you think about the world of food and food production, it's pretty disturbing what goes on out there. And, something like this, See the Untold Story, is something that I think a lot of us really need to wake up and pay attention to what's happening, especially when it comes to our world leaders and the decisions they're making or allowed to be made by large companies, and we certainly hear about these people quite often.
Absolutely. One of the sort of shocking things as we made the film, it began with this realization, reading a National Geographic article about the Svalbard seed bank. And for anyone who's heard of the Svalbard seed bank, this is the doomsday seed vault that was founded and started in the Arctic Circle as sort of a vault for the end of the world, storing the seeds of the world's agriculture. And just the very notion that we were at a state where we were beginning to sort of come up with a backup plan for our planet was shocking enough. But then to see some of the statistics in the article, and one of which stuck with us as we made the film, which was the study done in the early 80s that reported that 94% of our seed diversity had been lost since 1903, and digging into that study and sort of lifting the veil on, okay, how much really was lost, and what does that mean, and what are we doing about it now, became the impetus for making this film. And it really opened up a world of seed savers and seed banks and cultures around the world who had originated the food that we eat today. Something we don't really think about is, how did this food actually come to be? How was it bred and developed over millennia, 12,000 years in some cases, to become the food that it is now? And then, as you mentioned, going into the modern crises we face with not just food production, but with the control of our seed system and the rapid consolidation, like we see in so many different parts of our economy, is also happening in the seed market. We have intellectual patent laws on seeds, and we're patenting life, and we're, biotech is genetically modifying seeds. And so these all became elements of the film that we felt were necessary to sort of look into, explore the whole story of what is a seed, and why do we need to understand seeds today.
Yeah, you look at, too, how our food choices have actually changed our buying behaviors to where we want to find more non-GMO stuff. You certainly see a large replacement of, for instance, dairy products using seed milks. There's almond seed milk, coconut seed milk. And you think to yourself, as I was mentioning earlier in the program, as we begin to move in this direction, it seems en masse, that you start really putting what do we want to call it, a stress in that particular area of overconsumption. Tell us how your film talks about our decisions, and how we really need to pay attention, because, as you said, 94% of our seed supply seems to have disappeared. That's pretty alarming.
Yeah, I think when we heard that statistic, we felt like, hey, we need to really dig into what does this mean for us. I mean, clearly you see food in the grocery store. There's food out there for you to eat. What kinds of varieties of those foods are you seeing? Well, largely we're looking at very, very few varieties of oranges being eaten across the United States, a very few variety of apples. I mean, there's at one point, there's thousands of varieties of apples, and we know offhand you could probably name, 5, maybe 10, and you may not even be able to find all 10 of those at the grocery store, maybe just 3 or 4. And so if you look at what was lost, in many ways, probably more than 94% has been lost to actual consumption, to actual availability. And then, thankfully, in the last 30 or 40 years, we've had a huge rise in a movement of heirloom crops and heirloom gardening and heirloom seed saving. And so people have uncovered things that initially we thought were lost. They've uncovered them from an attic of their parents or their grandparents. They've found them in old coffee cans. And we've continued to breed and come up with new strains of crops. So we are restoring a diverse fabric over time, but it doesn't undo the fact that we lost an awful lot by just not paying attention, to be sort of being asleep at the wheel, as somebody that we interviewed for the film says, and not and abdicating the responsibility that we had for thousands of years as a nation of farmers in this country. For hundreds of years, people save their seeds from year to year, and it's only in the last 2 to 3 generations that that's really gone by the wayside. And now, practically nobody saves their seeds from year to year that you would talk to on the street. You'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that even knows what that is. And so to realize that what we've done in doing that is we've turned to consuming the food, but since we're not growing it and we're not responsible for where it comes from, who is in charge? Well, the people that are in charge are the companies selling the seeds, by and large. And we've seen that those have consolidated, and tens of thousands of seed companies have been bought up by a handful, really a cadre of 5 to 8 huge multinational corporations. And the frightening thing, and the thing that we talk about in the film, is the conflict of interest with many of these companies. These are not simply seed companies. They are larger biotech companies. Most of them are chemical companies that made their money selling pesticides that we spray on the crops that we eat now. And so they're directly tied to releasing seeds out into the world. Their interest is to sell seeds that need to be sprayed by pesticides. And so I think one of the major issues that we go into the film is looking at how that happened, how we went from a nation of farmers to one where we're buying seeds from chemical companies, and what we can do about it to change it.
Now, even as alarmist as people tend to scream out there, how do you see this future here, especially if we can become more proactive, as a film like this one, should inspire people to look to take action?
We've Taggart and I have always been filmmakers that really believe in empowering a grassroots movement of people to take action and make change when they see a film. We don't make documentaries that are kind of just simply a downer, because a lot of times that shuts you down. You see a crisis and you want to do something about it, but you feel like it's just too overwhelming for you to take on.
Right.
And so one of the things we really stress in this film is following a lot of everyday people. They're extraordinary in many ways. I mean, they're seed savers that are, not the person you would meet every day. They're obsessively saving seeds in their attic, or they're cataloging, they're running local seed banks. But these people are incredible in their passion for growing food and for saving seeds. And we wanted to communicate that passion to inspire people that this is not something that can only be done by PhDs and by, people at agricultural schools. This is something that for the entire history of humanity was done by everyday farmers and gardeners. And so we really advocate for a few different things. One is, try your hand at growing heirloom seeds in your garden, seeds that are not hybridized, seeds that will grow again the same way the next year if you save seeds. And then try it. It's actually a lot of fun to save those seeds. And the other piece is to look at what you're buying in the grocery store. And if you're buying things that are either heirloom crops or are organic, you're not putting money into the hands of the chemical companies that are consolidating and limiting the seed varieties and varieties of food that are available, and those same companies, you're not supporting them continuing to sort of ruin and degrade our soils across this country with increased pesticide use. So those are some things that we encourage as an everyday person can do. But there's a whole list of things on seedthemovie.com and our Take Action page that you can go to look at and dig deeper on how you can be part of the solution. That's really, really important to us.
Well, very well said. I know there tends to be at times documentaries that are out there sounding the alarm for the sake of just sounding the alarm, and it seems, that you want to be practical in saying there are, even if small steps that you can take to move in the right direction to being able to get things done. You realize sometimes they get to that point where it feels overwhelming, but you realize it's just one little step at a time. Again, making those conscious choices rather than railing against companies that are doing things that you really don't agree with. The best thing to do is just to make your voting decisions with your wallet. I mean, that's the simplest thing that you can do, and also taking action, as you said, creating little co-ops. Do you see things like that happening? I know in Portland, Oregon, we're really big. Our restaurants are even getting to a point where most of them are farm to table now, which is pretty amazing when you think about how that really generates an economy in and of itself, supporting the farmer. People go out to eat, and then they're getting fresh food, so everybody wins, it seems, all the way around. How do you see, like seed collectives, for instance, occurring?
Well, it's interesting. I think making this film, we felt like it was a subject that really crosses across some of the traditional political sort of divisions you see in some parts of, things like the food movement, where you see, that maybe that's a progressive liberal thing, or maybe that's a conservative thing. But seeds really are so foundational that it's really, really important to always have a localized seed system. And I think what we're finding as we've gotten away from that is that you don't have access to crops that that will grow well in your garden, in your climate. You don't have access to food that was grown near to you. It's shipped in from another country. And the more that you can support those local systems, the more you support seed diversity, because those local farms and, like you said, farm-to-table restaurants or farmers markets or places that you can go, you're supporting a local agriculture system. Even those farmers are buying their seeds oftentimes now from vastly different places. And so this idea of seed swaps is starting up, where people are swapping seeds instead of, hey, why are we buying seeds? Nobody's really bought seeds in the past. They were always traded, as sort of a common good. They were, hey, I've got this and it grows really well here. Why don't you try some and you can grow it out? Because one seed begets millions of seeds, and they're not, they weren't thought of as a commodity before about the 1920s, the way that they are now. And so returning to that idea of a localized regional seed system that's not fragile, it's actually very, very stable. If you have many, many different people in your local community growing crops that will feed that community, that work to be grown there, that work in that climate, either they're drought resistant if you're in the American Southwest, or they're resistant to flooding, they've been grown for generations and adapted to that place, you're much stronger for that. You have more food security for that than if you're reliant on seeds that were at a research facility that were made to grow in a certain condition that requires you to essentially start over. You have to spray the soil to sterilize it, and you have to put in all the fertilizers you need to restore it again. Why not work with seeds that are meant for your climate, your soil types, and work in that way? And so, these ideas of getting together in communities, Portland's certainly a place that has seed swaps going on. You can look them up in meetup groups and look at your local seed bank in your area. There may be a seed bank in your town, or better yet, there might be a seed library. So there's this new concept. We have over 500 seed libraries, and probably higher than that now, that have been popping up around the country that are just oftentimes in a public library space. So you can go into the public library and you can check seeds out like you'd check out a book. And you can grow them out. You can return your seeds next year from the seeds you saved. So these ideas, they build community, they create stability. They're much more stable than just the idea of having a backup seed vault in the Arctic. That's all of those seeds are in one place in that seed vault. It's highly, highly vulnerable. If we have seeds spread out across the country, in every country, the way that we had as we were growing and farming over the last 12,000 years, in many ways we have a much more sustainable system.
And that's important for people to understand, too, when you say that if it's centralized and it becomes very vulnerable in many different ways. And one of the things I've been real puzzled about is the thinking behind, let's say, these large companies that feel this passion or this need, if you will, to kind of decide and dictate what happens to something, especially in the natural world, and where they were emboldened with that kind of power. And then mostly how they even think those decisions they make are even reasonable. I mean, you look at it and it almost feels like, what, are you stupid or something? What are your thoughts as you were researching and putting this film together on something like that?
I think we have a section of the film that really goes through the history of how we got to the place we are, and like you said, it is commonplace to say, well, Monsanto's the enemy, or Bayer's the enemy, or Syngenta, or these big names, Dow, DuPont, the big chemical companies. And yes, we definitely are raising awareness about what is happening in the kind of consolidation, even the mergers between those companies that are happening now, so further consolidation. But the way that we got there was through this process I was talking about that went from abdicating our seeds and beginning to buy them instead of save them. And the onset of something called hybrids in the 1920s really opened the door for these large companies to sort of buy seeds, because with a hybrid seed, what happens is the company or the researchers are creating the seed strain, and you can't recreate it. If you grow those seeds out again the next year, they don't grow the same way. So then who has the control of that seed stock is that original company selling it. And it's a huge boon for a capitalist sort of society around seeds, saying, let's figure out how to commodify this and make money off it. So one of the first lobbyists actually in Congress was for the American Seed Trade Association. So it's very interesting that even things that we now commonly think of like lobbying began with agriculture and seed saving. Politicians always went around and in their stump speeches they gave away seeds for free because they knew that it would engender support in communities. So to go from a free and shared resource, that was distributed by places like the USDA prior to that in the millions of packets across the country for free, to something that's now commodified was a huge change. And then what happened in the last 100 years since then is that these hybrid companies that were selling seeds now got bought up by chemical companies, and now they're selling the seeds and the pesticides, as I talked about. And then these chemical companies begin to become biotech companies, and they move into the space where now it's important, and this is what you were mentioning in your original question, now we're not just hybrids where there's control of the seed strains, and we're not just chemical companies that are selling seeds that work best with the chemicals that are created, the pesticides and fertilizers. Now it's important to have intellectual property rights. And so in the late 1970s, there was a law passed called Diamond versus Chakrabarty, was the Supreme Court case that allowed the patenting of life, and it was actually for what many would think was a really good reason. It was for an oil-eating bacteria or for oil spills. Sounds kind of like environmental, to have this great bacteria that could eat up oil spills and help the oceans. But it opened the floodgates for patents, like we have on software patents or manufacture products, and we can have them on genetically modified seeds. And so that really, really changed the landscape, and now we're looking at a space where you can't save a genetically modified seed and grow it out the next year. You'll be sued. So this is truly a controlled, patented piece of property, and that really, really changes the landscape for farmers. And I think that's one of the things in the film that really polarizes people and audiences that watch it as feeling upset about that issue and what we do about it. Thomas Jefferson, in his writing said, the a seed is a shared part of the common heritage of mankind. It can't be patented. So to see how far we've come in America from our origins to now, it was pretty startling.
I think what's startling, too, as you bring up here, is the idea that originally you couldn't patent anything that could be found in the natural world, but yet we've found a way to kind of change that. And that is quite disturbing. It was like back when Angelina Jolie was having the issue where there was that particular gene that they were talking about that could cause breast cancer, and what was really happening is it was a big promotion to get this company to actually patent this particular gene, and then that way they could sell you the drug or whatever the case was in the test to see whether or not you had that. But, of course, that patent didn't go through. But I thought, yeah, they're just really finding little ways to kind of creep in there and really change some very important ways of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea is now that most of the agricultural funding from the U.S. government that goes into agriculture, they won't fund you if you don't have a biotech element in the grant. You have to have something that has this intellectual property piece. And so this idea of traditional breeding, of coming up with solutions without biotech, using just the natural laws of nature to breed new foods, you can do incredible things with traditional breeding, but there's no funding for it anymore because it's not the sort of progressive next best thing. And so what's happening as a result is all these incredible traditional breeders that have brought us amazing foods that would sell like gangbusters in restaurants, things like your purple carrots and your purple potatoes and things that are different and interesting and make eating fun and maybe introduce new flavors, or they grow better. They have drought tolerance. Now, you have to have a drought tolerance trademark, from a Monsanto product, and it has to be generally it's a GMO seed, and we're just looking past. It's like we've decided you can't have solutions outside of that. And it's really a narrow-minded outlook. And when you dive into this community like we do in the film of these incredible, passionate seed savers, you find out there's a lot of ingenuity there, and there just needs to be more support for these people.
So tell us, John, for our listeners, how they can find out about the film, where they can find the film being played, things like that.
Absolutely. So Seed, the Untold Story, is available everywhere essentially now, and you can go to our website, seedthemovie.com, where you can either stream it online or buy a DVD and have it shipped to you. We ship around the world, and so there's ways to find it essentially in every country, and it's translated into multiple languages. I think we have it in Italian, Spanish, and French subtitles. So we really are trying to get it out as widely as possible. And you can also do things like host a screening in your community, or buy a copy for your library, or connect on an educational level. One of the amazing things we're doing in the coming school year is we're leading an educational outreach campaign that we're calling Seed the Change, that is really targeted at youth and reaching communities where this film might not be shown normally. It might not be part of the conversation, whether that's a marginalized community, or we have a specific interest of reaching Native American communities and indigenous communities, because those communities are the people and the elders and the leaders that brought us our agriculture in this country in the first place. So sharing the film widely with these communities and on campuses. And so if anyone has insights or inroads or places they want to be shown or connections they have, please write us at seedthemovie.com, and please watch the film and become engaged that way, and be part of the Take Action on the website as well.
Very good. John, thank you so much for talking with us about this movie and what's going on in the world. It sounds like it's very encouraging. Certainly it'll raise an alarm there, but then the idea with the alarm is to take action. And that's certainly what this movie will encourage people to do. Thank you so much for being on the program with us today.
Thank you, Daniel.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more. Visit us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.